SITREP World Briefing for May 20th, 2026. 3 people were killed in a shooting at a mosque in San Diego on Monday, and investigators said the attack was carried out by teenage suspects whose alleged ideology reflected hatred toward multiple religions and racial groups. Among those killed was Amin Abdullah, a father of 8 and a security guard at the mosque, who intervened during the attack. Police and federal authorities moved quickly to reconstruct how the assailants planned and carried out the shooting. Authorities said the suspects were teenagers, and the investigation focused on evidence that they shared what officials described as a broad hatred of several faiths and ethnic groups, widening the case beyond a single community grievance. The attack has drawn attention because houses of worship in the United States have repeatedly faced threats from extremists targeting Muslims, Jews, Christians, and Sikhs. The deaths at the mosque have raised questions for local law enforcement, mosque leadership, and federal investigators about online radicalization, access to weapons, and the protection of worshippers during routine religious gatherings. The killing of Abdullah has become central to how the San Diego Muslim community is framing the tragedy, emphasizing both personal loss and the role he played in trying to protect others. As investigators work through the suspects' backgrounds, the case has likely become part of a broader national debate over hate crimes committed by young perpetrators, especially when those suspects appear to have embraced overlapping racist and anti-religious views. For community leaders in San Diego, the immediate challenge is securing funeral arrangements, supporting grieving families, and restoring confidence that worshippers can return to the mosque without fear. Petrol prices in the United Kingdom rose again as the war involving Iran pushed up fuel costs, with the average price of unleaded reaching 158.52 pence a litre, the highest level since the conflict began. The increase reflected disruption in global energy markets rather than a domestic tax change, and motoring groups warned that pump prices could climb further in the coming weeks if there is no resolution to the fighting. Because the United Kingdom imports fuel and remains exposed to swings in oil and refined product prices, developments in the Gulf can quickly affect drivers, transport firms, and household budgets across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. The immediate concern for British consumers is that a sustained rise in wholesale oil prices can feed into road fuel costs, freight charges, and eventually broader inflation. The Iran war matters because any threat to shipping routes or refinery supply chains in the Middle East can tighten global availability and raise the price traders are willing to pay for crude and fuel products. That mechanism has already begun to show up at British forecourts, where retailers are passing through higher costs to motorists, and industry analysts have signaled that diesel prices could also remain under pressure. For Prime Minister and Treasury officials, the rise in petrol prices presents a politically sensitive problem because fuel costs are among the most visible daily expenses for voters and can affect efforts to show that inflation is under control. The RAC warning that prices may keep rising if the Iran war is not resolved highlights how closely British economic conditions are tied to external security shocks. If the conflict persists, the impact is likely to extend beyond private car use to delivery networks, public services, and small businesses, all of which depend on stable transport costs and can quickly pass higher expenses on to consumers. The United States paused planned military strikes on Iran after President Donald Trump said he had held off a major assault, while Tehran and Washington exchanged threats over what might happen next. Trump said the suspension would last for 2 or 3 days, creating a narrow diplomatic window after Gulf states intervened to seek more time and to warn of the regional consequences of Iranian retaliation. On the Iranian side, officials said Tehran preferred diplomacy but was prepared for war, signaling that the pause had not lowered the risk of escalation, while both governments left open the possibility of further talks. Iran threatened to open new fronts if the United States resumed strikes, a warning that carried immediate implications for shipping and oil supply in the Gulf. Maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz continued on Wednesday, with 3 oil tankers, including Chinese and South Korean vessels, passing through the waterway, according to tracking data. The strait is one of the world's most important energy choke points, so every threat involving Iran, the United States, and Gulf Arab states is watched closely by governments, insurers, and energy traders far beyond the Middle East. The pause highlighted the growing diplomatic weight of Gulf states, which used their access to Washington and their exposure to Iranian retaliation to argue against immediate U.S. action. Their intervention showed that regional governments are not only arenas for U.S.-Iran competition, but also active players trying to shape the timing and scope of any confrontation. For Tehran, the message was that it could claim readiness for conflict while still saying it preferred diplomacy. For Washington, the delay suggested that military options remain on the table, but that the White House is still testing whether coercion, allied pressure, and short-term restraint can produce a deal before the crisis moves into open war. The World Health Organization warned on May 19th that the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo is spreading faster than first thought, with 131 deaths recorded and more than 500 suspected cases. The agency said it was concerned that transmission was no longer confined to one area, and it declared a global emergency after the outbreak spread beyond borders. This marks a setback for Congolese health authorities, which are trying to contain a virus in a country that has confronted Ebola outbreaks over the past decade. Doctors and public health officials are struggling to track chains of infection in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where insecurity, delayed detection, and community fear have complicated surveillance and treatment. Congolese authorities have acknowledged that medics were playing catch-up after the virus was detected late, while WHO officials have said the outbreak is unlikely to be over within the next 2 months. The challenge is greater because this outbreak involves a rare strain of Ebola and is unfolding in an area affected by armed conflict, displacement, and weak health infrastructure, all of which make isolation, contact tracing, and vaccination campaigns harder to organize. WHO's warning is significant because Ebola is a severe hemorrhagic disease that can spread through direct contact with bodily fluids, and outbreaks can accelerate quickly when treatment centers are hard to reach or mistrusted. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, previous campaigns benefited from established response systems, but the current outbreak has shown how quickly those gains can erode when conflict disrupts clinics and residents hesitate to seek care. With suspected cases already in the hundreds and concern that the true number may be higher, the outbreak has become both a national health emergency and a regional containment test. The UK Climate Change Committee said the United Kingdom must strengthen its preparations for extreme heat, warning that hotter summers could bring more deaths, greater workplace risks, and wider public health threats. In recommendations published on May 19th and May 20th, the committee said successive governments had failed to prepare adequately and urged ministers to set maximum working temperature rules. The advisors also highlighted the risk that rising temperatures could help disease-carrying mosquitoes establish themselves more easily, linking climate policy directly to health protection, labor standards, and resilience planning. The committee's intervention reflects a broader judgment that Britain is still organized around a cooler climate, while heat waves become more frequent and more dangerous. Advisors said the country needs clearer legal protections for workers during very hot weather, because current rules do not set a maximum temperature for workplaces. They also argued that adaptation can no longer be treated as a secondary issue, since heat affects hospitals, transport systems, schools, care homes, and housing, and can produce avoidable deaths when buildings trap heat or emergency plans are weak. Heat-related mortality has become a more prominent concern after recent European summers, and the possibility of mosquito-borne disease adds another layer to public health planning in a country not historically associated with such threats. The Climate Change Committee is pressing the government to translate climate advice into enforceable standards before the next major heat event tests the system. Sources are available at sitrep-brief.com.